I left my houseplants alone for almost a month. I implemented a few different methods, tips, and tricks to keep them hydrated and happy whilst I was away. Let's check in and see how they're doing now, which methods worked best and which need some improvement. Starting off strong with a tried and true method is the bottle method. This was definitely a success. Although the soil was dry, none of the leaves were curling, which means the plant was still hydrated. This Monstera also pushed out 2 new fully fenestrated leaves, showing that she had ample sunlight during this time. As the soil was dry, I have top watered with a full liter and re-added a bottle to my terracotta spike. Now let's have a look at my Fiddle Leaf Figs. It is spring here in Australia and I had new growth points on all of my stems. To keep my Fiddle Leaf Figs happy whilst I'm away, I place them in a large bowl which is filled with water. I also fully saturate the soil by top watering as well. The ficus does like to dry out fully in between waterings, which is why I didn't use the bottle method. There are a few signs of heat and water stress on the plant, which are these dry spots. Being so, this method worked fine for a 3-week period, but any longer I would utilize some additional watering methods as well. As this plant is also super bushy, doing a light prune before I left could have been helpful as well. For this ficus, I did prune a lot of the base leaves before I left, and she didn't show any signs of heat stress like the first one did. I am such an advocate for pruning, it really does help your plants to thrive. Although there is no dry spots on this plant, some of the leaves are drooping quite heavily, which lets me know she definitely needs a water. Most plants will have obvious signs when they need watering, and for the Fiddle Leaf Fig, it is drooping leaves. I usually prefer to bottom water my houseplants, but as I have been away for a while, I'm going in with the top water. This really helps to flush through any salts or minerals that may have built up in the soil whilst I was gone. Putting your plants in a bowl or bucket of water whilst you're away is such a great way to keep them hydrated. I highly recommend this method for your next vacation. Now, I missed my houseplants, but I missed my hound Marvin more, so we needed a quick cuddle break before I move on to the string method. I am happy to report that this worked perfectly for the plants I used it on. You can see that the reservoir of water at the base of the plant has been completely absorbed by the twine. The plant looks super healthy though, and both the soil and the twine at the top was still damp. This has worked perfectly for this period and would definitely last for 1 month or longer. You can find the step-by-step tutorial for how to do this DIY yourself on my channel. Now let's check in with my philodendrons. Just like my ficus, I went in with the bowl method and a heavy top water before I left. The water bowl that my plant was sitting in was dry, but the soil was still damp to the touch, so she was fine during this period. If you didn't already know, your finger is the perfect water meter. Push your finger into your plant's soil to see if it is hydrated or not. If your finger comes out completely clean, it means that your soil is dry and you need to water. If your finger, however, has soil stuck to it, it means that it is still moist and there is no need to water yet. Now, although the plant had plenty of water, it was definitely lacking humidity during this time. I usually have a humidifier running and also mist my plants. Without the additional moisture in the air, a few of my philodendrons leaves were stuck and needed a little help to release. I know some people say let nature take its course, but I am not one of those people. I mean, listen to this squeak. It is just so satisfying and will help stop your leaf from potentially rotting or snapping. Besides the stuck leaves, both of these plants were healthy and happy after the top and bottom watering method. Now let's look at my bird of paradise plant. To prep this one, I used the bottle method again and also gave a thorough top water. Being a large plant, which is also tropical, the Calatheas does have a higher water need. I was a little bit worried that I was going to come back to a wilted plant. And although the soil and the bottle are both completely dry, the leaves and the plant don't show any signs of heat or water stress, so this method worked perfectly for this time period. Now I'm back. I'm pouring a full liter of water over the top, and I will add a humidifier nearby to keep these leaves fresh. Whilst I was down here, I also had a pleasant surprise. Someone actually asked me the other day whether I still get excited when I see new leaves on my plants. As you can see here, I definitely do, and I'm ecstatic at these 2 new shoots. These are going to be large leaves, and this plant is already taking over my room, so it might be time to divide her. That is a job for another day though. As well as getting excited over new leaves, I also get excited about root growth. All of my water propagation's roots almost doubled in size whilst I was away, but as well as great root growth, I also had a rather alarming amount of algae growth. I did top up all of my water propagations before I left, but as there was no fresh oxygenated water being added, they became a little bit stagnant. Let's come back to that later in this video. For now, let's check in with my Monstera Thai constellation. Before leaving, I popped this plant in the shower to really soak the soil and wash off the leaves. I also added a saucer at the base, which I'd filled with water. Both the soil in the saucer is now completely dry, which is what I actually wanted to happen. This plant is more prone to root rot than its all green cousin, which is why I didn't add a bottle to this one. The soil is dry, but the leaves are not curling. Curling leaves on a Monstera are a clear sign of dehydration. The method I used worked perfectly for 3 weeks. If I was going for any longer, I would add a few water spikes as well. The peperomia, like the Thai constellation, is also more prone to rot. To prep this one, I just filled up the base of this decorative planter with a few inches of water. You can see that some of the leaves are curling and are a bit misshapen, which is a clear sign of underwatering in a peperomia. Again, I would add water spikes in the future. This peperomia, on the other hand, couldn't be happier and has pushed out so many blooms during the time I was away. Now, let's move on to what is apparently my most controversial hack. I always use the bathtub method when I'm leaving my plants alone for more than 2 weeks, and I know it works well. For this method, you simply need to add a few inches of water in the base of your bathtub and add in your water-loving plants. The maidenhair is the only one which looks a little sad, but she is my most dramatic plant, so there is no surprises there. On the other hand, my Calathea, Maranta, palm and begonia all look perfect. At the deeper end of the bathtub, there is still about 1 inch of water. In the shallow end, it had been absorbed, so next time I would move my plants closer to the deeper end. The soil on each of these plants still had some moisture in it, so this worked perfectly for this time. I'm just giving them a quick rinse down before I re-add them to the decorative planters. I have been doing this method for years and I've never come back to rotted plants or a gnat infestation. Trust me when I say if you do this correctly, it works so well for your plant. The only caveat for this method is, of course, you need to have natural sunlight in your bathroom. If you don't, you can stick to bowls, buckets, or even a kiddie pool. As well as the claims of root rot, I always get told that this method will scratch my bathtub or leave a yellow ring. Again, I've been using this method for years and this is not the case. This is how my bathtub looked once I drained the water away. Now this next clip is obviously sped up, but it took me exactly 43 seconds to clean the bathtub. I gave it a quick spray and wipe. No elbow grease was needed. I will always come back to using this method. It works so well for my water-loving houseplants. Now let's move on to my Hydro Monstera. Unlike my water propagations, this Monstera is in a coloured glass vessel. A lot of the water had been absorbed, but there was no algae growth. If you didn't know, using coloured glass or ceramic really helps to prevent algae growth in your water propagations. This is because they are more protected from UV light and also stay at a cooler temperature. Now, although most of my plants are absolutely thriving after my month away, a few of them looked really sad. At first, I couldn't figure out why until I watched back my prep video, and that is when I noticed I completely forgot to do any preparation for these plants. This is definitely the problem with owning over 100 plants, but I'm going to turn this into a positive. Let's pretend that this was an experiment to show you the difference between plants that are prepped and plants that aren't. Now, although none of these are on death's door, they definitely look poorly and all have yellow leaves. For the plants I did prep, none of them had yellowing leaves. You can really see how much they're drooping, and I'm just thankful that this happened during spring and not summer. After giving them all a good soak, I'm of course going in with my pruning shears. Now, I don't want to hear anyone tell me that I need to wait until the leaves are fully yellow or brown before I snip them off. Although the plant can reabsorb resources from these leaves, it doesn't need them. Houseplants are a hobby, but they are also an aesthetic, and yellowing and dying leaves on my plants is not the look I'm going for. You cannot tell me that this looks good. Decomposing matter, including leaves, can attract bugs. Pruning is a great skill to learn as it can help you shape your plants. It helps with size control and also keeps them healthy. It is also really satisfying to do. It is important to note though that pruning is not the same as propagation. With pruning, you simply need to cut back to the stem. If propagating, you need to be more deliberate with where you cut. Most plants can't propagate from a single leaf, they need a node. I have plenty of videos on my channel about how to propagate different plants, so keep an eye out for those as well. Now some plants I forgot to prep and other plants I left alone deliberately. I water my cacti and succulents monthly, so let's see how thirsty they are now. I like to bottom water my cacti and succulents. This way the topsoil stays fairly dry, which encourages the roots to grow deeper. You can see quite a lot of the water is being absorbed, but these plants are in terracotta and unglazed ceramic. This means the pot is absorbing a lot of the water, not the plant or the soil. All of these plants look totally fine after my weeks away. Unless you're going away for more than 2 months in summer, I wouldn't worry about prepping your cacti or succulents. Now let's get back to why my water propagations have turned green. I was actually very surprised that this happens because I rarely change the water when I'm at home and they never turn green. I have put the sudden algae growth down to the fact that it is spring now in Australia and really warming up. I obviously wasn't adding fresh water to the vessels during this time, so there was no flow of oxygen. The room they were left in gets very warm as well, and I wasn't home to open the windows and let in cool air. Therefore, I accidentally made the perfect breeding ground for algae. The room was warm and bright and there was no fresh oxygen. Now, I don't love the algae growth, but lucky it wasn't the only thing growing. All of the roots on these water propagations more than doubled during this time, which was a nice surprise. It just shows that sometimes you've got to take the good with the bad. Luckily, removing algae is a fairly easy fix, so let's do it now together. To start off with, I am just going to rinse all of the roots. Try to be careful because roots can snap off during this process. Don't worry too much if the roots of your water propagation have a small amount of algae still on them. Keep watching and I'll show you my hack of stopping algae growth in its tracks. Now that the roots are semi-clean, I'm going to turn my attention to the vessels. Some of these water propagations have been in the vessels for months, and this is the first time that I've had algae and the first time I've had to properly wash them. For my water propagations, I top up the water every other week or as needed. Generally, I change the water monthly or less, but this is obviously a unique situation. If your water propagations are frequently growing algae, then there's a few things you can do to stop this. You can swap clear glass for colored glass or even ceramics. This will keep your vessel cooler and stop as much sunlight from getting in, which will stop algae from growing. As always, there is a catch, and doing this means that your roots will grow slower as well. If you're not in a rush to root your plants, then using colored glass or ceramic is perfectly fine. Next is to ensure that you keep a fresh flow of water and oxygen. You can do this by topping them up as needed or go a little bit fancy and add a pump. A pump will keep your water fresh and oxygenated. You need both of these things for a happy, healthy plant. A lack of oxygen in the water will actually kill your plant over time. Water propagations and hydroponic plants need water which is regularly aerated because this produces dissolved oxygen. If the roots aren't getting a fresh supply of oxygen, you may get a rotting plant. This is the same thing that happens to a plant in soil when you overwater it. Now back to the refill. I am lucky to live somewhere where the tap water is fine to use on houseplants. If this isn't the case for you, you can try rainwater or bottled water. For a healthy water propagation, you want to make sure that your plant doesn't fall too far into the water. Keep your foliage and about an inch of the stem above the waterline. All of these water propagations are now ready to transfer to soil. As a general rule, you want your roots to be at least an inch long. I usually wait until they are a little bit longer and have first and secondary roots. I also generally really like the look of water propagations. I think they're so pretty in their glass vessels, and I really enjoy the process of watching the roots grow. You can also keep a lot of houseplants in water full time. Personally, I have 2 Monsteras and a peace lily, which have been in hydroponic for over a year now. I add a water-soluble fertilizer monthly to make sure that they're getting all the nutrients they need. All 3 are growing well and producing new foliage, and the peace lily is flowering. As you can see, I've moved my Ficus lyrata propagation into an amber glass vessel. This is because there was still a lot of algae on the roots, and I didn't want to try and scrub it off and risk damaging the plant. And that's it, they're refreshed and back on my plant shelf. Find the how-to for each of these plants on my channel.